Hi there, everybody. Welcome back. Happy to be back with you. And today we are talking about the role of estrogen with mast cells and mast cell activation syndrome, which is very commonly affecting women. But interestingly, men can have trouble with estrogen dominance as well. And that's what we're going to be diving into is estrogen dominance, estrogen and mast cells. How do you find out what's going on with your hormone levels? Different things that you can look for in terms of testing and different types of testing that you could do. And then I'll be sharing with you my favorite test that I really like to use that you might want to check out for yourself as well. So, welcome again, everybody. If you're new to us, you can find us at mastcell360.com. So, mastcell360.com. Lots of free resources there for you. These videos are always recorded, and you can always find them in the live section of our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/mastcell360. And I'd love to know who's on here with us. I can't see you unless you pop in a comment. So I see some people, Nancy and Anna and Leslie and Jen are on here. So hi, guys. Let me know that you're here and where you're joining us from. So we're going to jump into some of our information. If you're new, let me know so we can welcome you to the community. So let me start with, I've got some slides for you guys here. And thank you, Melanie. She says, so grateful for your work and this info. Well, I'm really grateful for our community because, when I was going through this, it was really hard to find information back then and very, very challenging to put these things together and hard to find a community or people that understood. So it's actually really nice for me as well to know that I'm not the only one dealing with this. And I'm sure it's helpful for you guys as well. And Mary's new here with us today. So, Mary, I want to welcome you to our community. I'm really glad that you're joining us. And if you guys can say hi to Mary, welcome her, let her know that she's in a supportive place here. We've got a great community of people. All right. So, starting with some of our information, as our quick disclaimers, we always have to do every week that this is a course for informational and educational purposes. And I might have to restart my slides. Seems like I've got a little glitch here. Let me see if I can get them running again. Looks like the slides aren't responding properly. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to close them out. Sorry, guys. And then get this restarted here for you. Not sure what happened. All right, so I think we'll be ready to go here. And we've got people from Poland, and then Magda's also new here from Romania. Welcome, Magda. Really glad that you're here with us. And if you guys can help me welcome Magda as well. All right, let's see if this is going to actually advance the slides. Here we go. Okay, now we're ready to roll. So just like always, this is for informational educational purposes, not here to treat, diagnose, cure, prevent illness, work with your healthcare provider. If you see links, sometimes they may be affiliate links. That means that Mast Cell 360 might make a small commission if you purchase through the link. It never costs you any more, but we get a percentage back, and that helps us with all of our free resources, keep supporting that, all the ongoing research that we do. So we really appreciate your support when you feel called to and want to use our links. And then what you'll see will be copyright. All right, let's start with what is estrogen dominance, just in general. What does this mean? So a lot of times we think about estrogen dominance as just meaning people who have really high estrogen levels, which is one way that you can look at it. But estrogen dominance really is about imbalance of these hormones. And you can have estrogen dominance even without high levels of estrogen. And like I said at the very beginning, and I know more people are still coming on and joining us, that estrogen issues can even happen in men. So our guys out there, I know a lot of times you think about estrogen, he doesn't think it applies to you. But if you are estrogen dominant and you have mast cell issues, it may affect you as well. And estrogen dominant can occur in postmenopausal women. And I see this quite a bit. And this can be part of the reason for a lot of these postmenopausal symptoms that people get. So these are some of the things that we're going to dive into today. So estrogen dominance has been linked to acne, particularly in younger people, but I don't know about you, but I've occasionally, when I've been in these estrogen dominant situations, had acne come back up here in my 40s, which feels like I'm a little too old for that. And I'm going to show you actually my test results and the different forms of estrogen dominance. So we have some very specific applications here. It's been linked with constipation, loss of sex drive, depression, weight gain, menstrual problems like menstrual pain, clotting, heavy bleeding, and estrogen dominance has been linked in the research with increased risk of uterine and breast cancer, cardiovascular disease, fibroids, PCOS, which is cystic ovaries, endometriosis, and definitely mast cell activation. I've had estrogen dominance most of my life and have had to work on it. And it first came up for me. So I entered menstruation quite early. And by the time I was 13, my periods were so incredibly painful. I would be doubled over in pain. And I wrote about this in more depth on our blog. There was a period of time, or there was this one time in particular where the pain was so severe I couldn't stand up, I couldn't walk, I couldn't talk, and my parents thought my appendix had burst. So I was just 13. I remember being in the ER. They checked, it wasn't the appendix. Then they used an ultrasound and saw that I had ovarian cysts bursting. And if you guys have had that, oh my gosh, that's painful. So of course it took until I was in my late 30s to even learn about estrogen dominance and what was going on there. But balancing those estrogen levels has really helped my own mast cell activation, huge changes in cycles, and a lot of women find that once they balance that estrogen in the right time, of course, there's an order of operations for these things, but it can help them. Now, if you have mold toxicity, here's something I want you to know. If you're detoxing from mold, which is something we talk about a lot, that you can't get the hormones fully fixed until the mold is out. So you may have to keep balancing and things may keep shifting. This is why it's important to test and keep following your testing to see what's going on. Because I had times where I was addressing that estrogen dominance, I was doing better. And then I started getting low estrogen symptoms and tested, and I had overshot and the estrogen was too low. So I had to back off. And we're going to talk about that, how you can get your own testing and be following some of this stuff. And hopefully you have a practitioner who can guide you in this. But I know that sometimes that can be hard to find. Generally, functional practitioners are the ones that are going to be trained in what we're talking about today. And Nancy asked a question, is the testing reliable while doing mold detox? Yes, good question. It is reliable. It's just that things are going to keep shifting. So you may have to keep adapting what you're doing and keep an eye on it. Another good reason to test is that mold toxicity can make things look very different in terms of symptom presentation. I'll talk about that just a little bit more in a minute. Hi, Melissa. I want to say hi to Melissa. Give her a shout out. She's new as well. So we've got a lot of new people who joined us today. Welcome to our community, Melissa. We're glad you're here. And Taylor, yes, I'm going to go into testing options and my favorite test here today. Let's first zoom back and talk about what are adrenal hormones. So what are these adrenal hormones in general? We often think about the progesterone and estrogen being made in the ovaries, which they are, but did you know they're also made in the adrenals? And your adrenal glands, for those who are new to this, sit on top of your kidneys. Now, what's made there comes from cholesterol and combines with B5. And then it makes pregnenolone, which is considered the master steroidal hormone. Then DHEA, testosterone, estrogen compounds, progesterone compounds, cortisone, and cortisol. So these are all also made in the adrenals. And I wanted to talk about how these are connected from a high level so that you'll understand why the testing looks at this whole cascade. While we're on this, I also want to touch on the cholesterol piece. We need cholesterol to make these hormones. And a lot of the studies that people were using to look at cholesterol and issues with cholesterol and cardiovascular risk. I don't know how many of you know this. It'd be interesting to know. I'd be interested to know how many people have heard this before. A lot of those studies that link cholesterol, cardiovascular risk, total cholesterol, were actually funded by the pharmaceutical companies that were producing statins. So they wanted those studies to show a link. When you take those studies out, the studies that weren't biased by that kind of funding don't link total cholesterol cardiovascular risk. They also don't link dietary cholesterol with cholesterol levels. Our bodies make a lot of cholesterol, and we might do a whole segment on cholesterol in the future, but I just wanted to touch on it here. We have to have cholesterol to make these hormones and to make our bile, which is so essential for fat digestion and for detoxification. So something to think about when you see those total cholesterol levels come back above 200, is that really a problem? Now, cholesterol has to be what's called sulfated. So that means you have to have sulfur compounds to get that cholesterol into the form that it can become bile and become these hormones. And many times when you see that total cholesterol starting to creep up, and we'll see that in mold toxicity, that cholesterol, it's a sulfur issue. It's not getting sulfated and not getting converted. It's not really from dietary, how much cholesterol, how much fat you're eating. And I've seen a lot of people who went very low fat because that's been the conventional advice, who stopped making hormones and they weren't making bile. So just some things, some food for thought here. Now, let's look at how these hormones are linked. I'm going to show you a chart here. And don't worry if this feels overwhelming. You don't have to understand all this for the rest of Facebook Live, but I want to throw this up for some of our more advanced people here and our practitioners. So we've got our cholesterol up here at the top. Let's see, I'm seeing if I can get a laser pointer for you. Here we go. So we've got this cholesterol here, and cholesterol gets made into the master hormone called pregnenolone. And these are all called steroidal hormones that are made in the adrenals here. That pregnenolone can get made into DHEA and down to testosterones and estrogen. So that's one branch. Pregnenolone to DHEA, testosterones, and estrogens. The pregnenolone gets made into progesterone, and then the progesterone can feed over into these hormones. And progesterone gets fed into cortisol. So in the future, we'll talk more about cortisol and its role with mast cell activation. Today, we're going to stick with primarily estrogen and progesterone. And then the progesterones also get made into aldosterone. So why is this important in our conversation? Many of us have problems with blood pressure, usually more low in this population, but some people have high blood pressure. Aldosterone controls the sodium-potassium balance. This can be part of people feeling thirsty all the time, dumping their sodium, which can contribute to low blood pressure, or retaining the sodium and dumping the potassium, and that can contribute to higher blood pressure. One of the factors. There are many factors here. But in addressing some of these things, again, we'll come back to this in terms of the cortisol picture, but I wanted you to see how these hormones are linked here and how they're linked with cortisol. And there's something called the cortisol steal, where cortisol, the body will preference cortisol and will pull away from progesterone in order to be able to make that cortisol, and that can worsen estrogen dominance. All right, so let's go into some other information. And we'll do our Q&A at the end. We've got some great questions coming in here. I'll circle back to them when we get to the end. Just a reminder, if you can please keep your questions on topic about estrogen dominance today and mast cells. And I'll get to as much as I possibly can. And then if you have questions that are personal health questions, I can touch on them sometimes if they're high level that might help a lot of people. They're really specific. I may not be able to get to them, and I apologize. All right, so roles of estrogen. Let's look at this. Estrogen is, of course, important in puberty. It helps promote growth. It's required in pregnancy for full-term pregnancy and development of the fetus. It's really important in bone health. So we don't want no estrogen either. And it plays a role in osteopenia and osteoporosis. It is important in heart health and helps regulate those cholesterol levels, helps regulate cardiovascular. We just don't want it to be dominant. And if you've ever had very low estrogen, you know that lubrication gets affected, and that can make it hard to have sex. So these are just some of the roles of estrogen. And there are three major types of estrogen. We're going to talk about what's called E1, called estrone. And this is a weaker type of estrogen in terms of the action on the body. It's usually more dominant during menopause. Then we have E2, estradiol. This is the strongest estrogen, has the strongest impacts on the body, plays really important roles in bone health. And it's also been called dirty estrogen, and that's because it can contribute to estrogen dominance, particularly if it's out of balance. Now, I don't want to, evilize this. I don't want to say that we don't want any E2 estrogen. We do. It's all about balance. Just like we don't want to wipe out our mast cells. We need them to survive, but we don't want them over responding either. It's all about balance. E3 is estriol, and this is a very protective form of estrogen. So we're going to come back to these three forms as we're talking about there are three major types of estrogen dominance. One of the types has to do with the ratios of these three estrogens. So E1, so weaker estrogen, E2 is the strongest estrogen, and then E3 is the really protective form of estrogen. I'm going to leave this up for just a second if you need to get a screenshot here. Now we're going to go into looking at roles of progesterone. Progesterone helps regulate the menstrual cycle. Menstruation starts when progesterone and estrogen both drop, but progesterone drops more sharply, and that's what will initiate the shedding of the endometrium from the uterus. It helps support pregnancy as well, helps metabolize fat into energy. So you can see how estrogen dominance, if we don't have enough progesterone balance, can affect our ability to metabolize fat. It helps calm anxiety, and estrogen dominance is well known for creating anxiety. Progesterone has a real role in preventing autoimmune disorders and helping with normal sleep patterns, restoring libido, and progesterone is mast cell calming, whereas that E2 estradiol, if it's dominant, is mast cell triggering. So progesterone, mast cell calming, and DHEA also, just a side note for people, DHEA also has been shown in the research literature to have mast cell stabilizing effects. Now, let's talk about these three main types of estrogen dominance. The first one is you may have more E2, that estradiol, than progesterone. I'm going to show you examples of all of these three. The second one is that the estrogen metabolites, the E1, the E2, the E3, can be out of balance, or it can be how the estrogen's getting broken down into what are damaging molecules. It can be DNA damaging. And we're going to look at testing data. We're going to look at my own tests. And I've had all three types of this estrogen dominance. I'm going to show you. And what I'm showing you is from the Dutch test. And Suze will put links in. You can actually get this on your own if you would like. And you can order it. You can run it on your own. She'll put a link in where you can do that. And like I said at the beginning, if you do use our links, it never costs any more, but we might make a small commission, and it does help support all of our research and our free resources. So we always appreciate your support if it is what's right for you. So let's talk about this more E2 estrogen than progesterone is what we're looking at here. And this is one form. So you can see here, this is from my Dutch test. Just looking at that E2 estrogen compared to the progesterone. Now, we're not looking at the numbers here, but the way you look at this is looking at this kind of a dial, looks like a speedometer. So where you have the stars, this is the range that's expected for your gender. And Andrew's asking, is the Dutch test applicable for men? Yes, you can also run it with men. So good question, Andrew. So it's based on these ranges they have are based on gender. They're based on age. And then if you're a woman, they're based on whether you're menstruating, you're premenopausal or postmenopausal. And the stars, this is your ideal range where you'd be somewhere in here. And we're not looking at the specific number, but we're looking at where we are relatively in the estrogen levels versus the progesterone. So you can see just on the dial that I've got relatively more E2 estrogen, estradiol, than progesterone. So that's one form of estrogen dominance. Now you might want to save this video. Remember that these are all recorded and you can come back to them, because if you get this testing, you can come back and take a look at these levels. All right, so now let's go to the next form here. I wanted to talk about this first. So little difference between being what's called estrogen dominance and progesterone dominance. So estrogen dominance contributes to autoimmunity. Progesterone dominance can prevent or be protective against autoimmunity. Oh, and Suze wanted me to let everybody know that the website for that test is sometimes loads a little bit slowly. So you may need to give it a few extra seconds to load. They've had some slowdown on that website just from the amount of traffic that comes in. Now, estrogen dominance can be involved in weight gain, whereas progesterone dominance can help turn this fat into energy. Estrogen dominance is associated with migraines, progesterone dominance with preventing migraines. Estrogen dominance is associated with depression and anxiety, whereas the progesterone, when you're more balanced that way, acts as a natural antidepressant. In the estrogen dominance, people may have more insomnia and sleep issues, but progesterone can help promote the normal sleep patterns. Estrogen dominance associated with decreased sex drive, progesterone dominance with restoring the libido. Estrogen dominance is mast cell triggering, and progesterone dominance is mast cell stabilizing. Now, again, somebody asked why they couldn't take progesterone. You have to bring this in the right order of operations. So if you're supplement sensitive, it wouldn't be the first thing you would do. You would generally want to, and this is why I rolled out my courses the way that I did, you would work on the nervous system calming. You would work on supporting the mast cells with some of the mast cell stabilizing agents, and make sure that you've got your environmental mold handled. And then you can start working with, hopefully, if you've got mold toxicity, you're working with some binders. And that's about when I would start doing some hormone supporting around that phase. If somebody's done all of those things and still not tolerating progesterone, then you might have to work with, one, bioidentical for sure. The synthetic progesterones are a whole different story. So we're talking about bioidentical support. We're going to get into that in a future Facebook Live. Today's about background and testing, and then we're going to talk about how to balance these hormones in the future. But there's a difference between the bioidentical and the synthetic that's really important. it may be very helpful to go really low and slow. And if somebody's still having problems, then they may have to work on clearing out some of the detox pathways and supporting the liver, like I talk about in the MC360 Mold Masterclass. All right, let's talk about the next form of estrogen dominance, which is when these metabolites, so when I say metabolites, I mean the E1, the E2, the E3, when those are out of balance. So you can see here on my test that I was 15 on E1, 3.14 on that E2, and 7.5 on the E3. So you can already see my E3, or my E2 is the most, the highest of these in terms of, again, we're looking relatively, not just at the number, but where it's landing on that dial in that range. There's something called an estrogen quotient that could be helpful. And you might want to get a screenshot as I put this out here. So estrogen quotient is where you take E3 level, divide it by the E1 plus the E2. Now, I know this takes us back to math, and just to remind you, if you're putting this in your calculator, add E1 and E2 first, and then you divide the E3. Otherwise, if you put the E3 divided by E1, it's actually going to divide just that and then add the E2, and you're going to get a different number. So you got to add E1 and E2 first, then take the E3 and divide it by your total here. So what we did for mine is we took my 7.5, that's my E3. Then we took the E1, 15, plus the E2, 3.14. So that's 18.14 was my total here. And then took 7.5 divided by 18.14. That gives me 0.39. That's my estrogen quotient on this test. Our ideal is 1.5 or higher. So what that tells us is that my E1 plus E2 here, these two are too high compared to my E3. I need more of that protective estrogen, that protective E3. All right, let's look at the third one, which is breaking down estrogen into these damaging metabolites. There are 4 major metabolites that estrogen will break down into. What's called 2-hydroxyestrone, 2-OH. And this is protective, and it helps block these stronger, dirty estrogens. Then we've got 4-hydroxyestrone, 4-OH. This one can convert to what are called quinones. They've been shown to damage DNA. This is what's thought in some of the research literature that may be promoting certain types of reproductive cancers, and that's called a dirty estrogen as well. Then we've got what's called 16-alpha-hydroxyestrone. Just call it 16-OH to keep it simple. This one, when it's high, as I said, with inflammation, an excess of omega-6s, so having omega-6 and omega-3s out of balance, and omega-6s, when they're out of balance, can also trigger mast cells. Obesity, hypothyroidism, and associated with an increase of breast cancer in the literature, another dirty estrogen. So let's look at how that shows up on the test results. And here's a snippet again from mine. So here's where the estrogen showing me where it breaks down. And you can see, so we talked about, let me back up one more time and show you. The 2-OH is the protective. We want a good bit of that. But the 4-OH and the 16-OH, these can be problematic. My 16-OH is actually quite low. My 2-OH was good, but look at this 4-OH. That's quite high. So that was my other indicator. Oh, I better be working on this, work on these pathways and help support them. And this has been shifting. I didn't put my previous results up, but all of this was quite low before. So then I started supporting and I was doing well. And I'm still going through this mold detox and things shifted again. So I'm glad I rechecked because I have to adjust my protocol. So I gave you a little breakout here. They give you this pie chart and they show you, it might be hard to see on a phone, but they show you the expected ratios here. And then they show my ratios. So the expected ratios I should have a good bit of the 2-OH, which I do. But then the 4-OH should be between about 7.5 to 11%. I'm at 15.3, so a little too high there. And then the 16-OH, we should be between about 13 and 30, and I was at 0.8. So it's actually lower than usual, but I'm not going to worry about that because I don't want that to be high. So let me tie this in together, and then we'll talk about some different kinds of testing. So we've talked about that estrogen dominance can contribute to increased mast cell activation. And we'll see this showing up in our clients with trouble sleeping. It can contribute to increased sensitivity in foods, constipation or diarrhea, pain, swelling, water retention, headaches, and these cyclical kind of flares. And then estrogen also has a role with histamine intolerance. Estrogen can cause mast cells to release histamine, and then that rising histamine level actually will trigger the body to produce even more estrogen, so you can get a cycle here. Also, research shows us that estrogen dominance can reduce DAO. That's our major histamine degrading enzyme in the small intestine, diamine oxidase. Now, if we balance progesterone, we can help stabilize the mast cells. We can reduce the mast cells from making histamine. And again, I'll be talking about how we do this in a different Facebook Live. It's too much to do it all together. So I want to get you the testing information today. And then we'll go into that here in a few weeks. We want to test, not guess. So this is really critical. And the reason I say this, I was trained to look at people's symptoms and to get a sense of what's happening in the hormones based on that. And for the general population, that can work quite well. However, I specialize in mold toxicity. I specialize in people who are really sensitive. They often have other things like Lyme going on. They may have metals. And these can turn everything upside down. I have had some people who their symptoms looked classic estrogen dominant. And then when we got their testing, they were actually extremely high progesterone, and there was something else going on. One person I had to refer to an endocrinologist to get screened for things like pituitary and other types of tumors that might be affecting the hormone production, adrenal tumors and things like that. So do make sure that you're testing. I would not just guess. And when we talk about ways to support estrogen and progesterone balance, it can be really helpful to know which form of estrogen dominance you have so that you know which to focus on and what can help you the most. So let's talk about testing. There are some different ways you can test these hormones. You can look at saliva, and saliva can be very helpful for estrogen, progesterone. These are more stable in the saliva. It's not the best for cortisol, but just the progesterone, the testosterone, the DHEA, the estrogens, saliva can work well. Blood is another option. A lot of practitioners use the blood markers and really like to use those, and that's okay. I do find that it's not as stable, so the levels can change much more quickly, even within a day, and it rarely gives you the E1, the E2, the E3, or the detox metabolites. Blood's not very accurate for cortisol because cortisol can change quite a bit. And if you're looking at cortisol, you want to look at 4 points throughout the day so you see the cortisol curve, basically, see what's happening through the day. Then there's urine testing. That's my personal favorite. Now, there's lots of ways to do this, and I'm not saying other people are wrong. I'm just sharing what I find the most helpful. And you can get some user error in collection of the samples, so that can be the downside, particularly if the urine is very, very dilute. So the one downside with the urine is that you have to watch some of your fluids just to make sure that you're not getting that urine so dilute. And there's always instructions in the testing. And this type of testing is very helpful for the cortisol, though. Now, there's two types of urine testing as well. I want to clarify. There's like a urine where you collect a urine sample in a cup, and that may not be the best for cortisol, but this dry urine test is what Dutch does. And you basically urinate on these little paper strips, and then you can put paper towels out on your vanity and let them dry. This test looks at a number of things and how they're connected, which is why I find it the most useful for me. And estrogen, so they test the E1, the E2, and the E3. They test the detox metabolites we talked about. They test DHEA, testosterone, progesterone, cortisone, which is a storage form of cortisol, cortisol itself, and that's a 4-point through the day of both. And then they check the melatonin levels. And I also really like that they do 8 OHDG. This is a type of DNA damage that can be happening from the quinones, from that 4-OH I talked about. Now, if that sounds like gibberish to you, don't worry. We've got people at all kinds of levels. People who are brand new beginners and people who are advanced practitioners who come on here. So I try to make it useful for everybody. And if something sounds like gibberish, don't get overwhelmed. It's okay. I'm going to just show you the big picture of what this testing looks like, and then we'll do some questions here soon. So they give you this big dashboard. This gives you, and that's where I pulled the E2 and the progesterone levels. They give you an overview. You can see my testosterone was high, my DHEA was high. I was actually supplementing DHEA and I overshot. So that's why I had to recheck here. And they show you what that cortisone looks like. Now I take hydrocortisone, so that's why I'm shooting up here. We'll do that. That's a whole nother Facebook Live. Then this is the big picture they show you. Now that's hard to see on a phone, but they do show you that the master hormone pregnenolone, they don't measure that directly. That's best to get in blood. They show you how things branch off into the progesterones, the DHEA, the testosterones, the estrogens. Those are the 3 estrogens. Then you've got the metabolites here, the detox metabolites. And then this is what the testing, they show you the melatonin. I take melatonin as well, which is why my level was high. That's normal if it's high. And then this is looking as the HPA axis, hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, working well. There's that storage, cortisone, and cortisol. And again, that's a whole nother topic, but I wanted to show you that's included. So if you're looking for this, if you're interested in getting this for yourself, this is where you can find it at mastcell360.com/Dutch test. Just give that a little bit of time to load. And this is called the Dutch test. Now, what we looked at is called the Dutch complete. So Dutch complete. There is a cycle mapping that's also available, and that can be helpful for people who aren't sure when they're ovulating, or for people who are trying to get pregnant, seeing what's happening. If you want to check your hormone levels every day, you can do the Dutch cycle mapping as well. So let's get into some of these questions. Nancy's asking, do you know what the turnaround time is on the Dutch test? It's generally about 3-4 weeks, depending on how backed up they are, but usually that's the last there. Now, what we're going to focus on question-wise has to do with what we covered on estrogen dominance in general in mast cells and testing. I'll see if I can get to some of the other questions if they're related to what to do about progesterone, but again, we're going to cover a lot of that info here in just a couple weeks. And let's see. Andrew said he has low testosterone and thinks it's being converted to estrogen, and that can happen. I'm glad you mentioned that. I want to back up here to this test result. So testosterone gets converted to estrogens by something called aromatase, and this is why I said estrogen dominance can affect men as well. So thank you for sharing that, Andrew. When this happens, this aromatase, this can be really affected by things like mold toxins. And you can get this upregulation of testosterone to estrogens that can impact women in estrogen dominance, but men can get those issues as well, and more mast cell activation related to that. And then Taylor was asking, is it reliable? I find that this is one of the most reliable in terms of looking at all these points of data. Taylor, I really like this test. And then Rosemary was saying she's postmenopausal in her 70s. And yes, saying postmenopausal women can also be estrogen dominant. Some of the testing doesn't seem accurate. It can, definitely can be confusing. So hopefully this took some of the confusion out of it for you and gave you some new ways of thinking about it and some ways that can be reliable. They do say in the instructions to come off of hormones if you're taking them, but sometimes it can be really helpful to stay on them to see what's happening when the hormone, depends on what your practitioner wants to see. But I stayed on mine so I could see what was happening as I was taking what I took, what I take to support my hormones. And that was more helpful for me than going off because it helped me tweak my protocol. All right, Taylor's got a request for cholesterol, so we'll put that on our list to get to in the future. Let's see, Nina's saying she had acne as a teen, now have mast cell activation pretty much since birth, but it's been manageable at the time. Sad to review the medications I got from well-meaning doctors for my skin. No one looked at the whole system. I know, Nina, and most of us are in that boat. I get it. And one of the things we have to remember is this mast cell activation is so new. I have people who are medical school students who come to our practice for help, and they tell me that they're still today not being taught about mast cell activation syndrome. So this is all quite new. I mean, we're really on the cutting edge in terms of what we're looking at, and it takes about 20 years for the research to trickle into the medical schools usually. So that's part of what we're dealing with, and why people who are really proactive like you guys are the ones that do well. And then this is really in the domain of functional practitioners. Then let's see, Louise was asking, she was doing progesterone, bioidentical, DHEA, and pregnenolone because of worsened MCAS. Those actually generally mast cell supportive as long as the pregnenolone isn't rushing down into more estrogen, which is one reason you want to recheck after you do some things to support those hormones. Mast cells can contribute to the hormone issue, but I always think of there's something triggering the mast cells. What's underlying? What's keeping the mast cells overreactive, over responding? That's where we really get improvements and changes for people as we think about that. What is that? And mold toxins, you guys, are particularly things like zearalenone, very estrogenic, and they act just like estrogens in the body. So that's something that we always want to be looking at is mold toxins. We talked about this cortisol stealing. So we talked about how the body will preference, if I go back to that chart early in, the body will preference making cortisol and will steal from the progesterone to make it. That is common, and cortisol is mast cell stabilizing. So we'll cover that more in a future in a future Facebook Live and some of our research that we put out in our blog posts. But that is a common thing that can happen. And when we talk about that, we'll talk about supporting cortisol also to indirectly support that progesterone. Now, Rose, why you can't take progesterone, we touched on that. There can be lots of reasons, and you may need somebody to help you to help you track that down. Anne's asking, can we test while breastfeeding? Will it be accurate? It's a good question. I mean, it'll be accurate for where you are point in time while you're breastfeeding, and then it's going to change afterwards. So look at what your desires are. And when you're breastfeeding, there's not a lot that you can do until you're done breastfeeding, because a lot of these agents will pass through the placenta into the, pass through the breast milk to the baby. So really be careful about what you're taking if you're breastfeeding, and make sure that you've got a practitioner reviewing that with you, and making sure that what you're doing is safe there. All right, so we've got some other questions here. I'm looking for questions that are really related to our topic here today. Anne is asking, what causes the high estriol? So if we step back to our different types of estrogens again, estriol is E3. Things that we're going to talk about in this upcoming Facebook Live can support balancing to that estriol, that protective form of estrogen. And it can be good to have more E3. So that's something that we want to have. What causes high estradiol? There can be a lot of things. There can be mold toxins. There can be consumption of plastics that are estrogenic. There can be eating conventional meats or conventional dairy that has growth hormones. Stress can contribute to estrogen dominance. So we're going to get into that into this future Facebook Live a little bit more as well. So Jessica's asking, do you recommend testing at various times through your cycle, see if your hormones are fluctuating improperly? That's what that cycle mapping does. It maps estrogen and progesterone. And that can be helpful for people if it seems like you're not having a normal cycle. Then you can run the cycle mapping with the Dutch Complete. And the cycle mapping is going to map your estrogen and your progesterone every day of the cycle. And it just depends, again, on your case. And you might want to talk with your practitioner, if you have one, about what makes sense for you. Or if you're doing this on your own, you may want to look at both if you see that it just doesn't seem like you're following that normal kind of cycle. Anna's asking, can high inflammation trigger mast cells too? Yes. Anything that's inflammatory can trigger mast cells, and mast cells will produce inflammation as well. So you can get into cycles there. Mary Liz is asking a question. It's a good question. This is a huge question. So I don't think we can answer this and do it justice today. But she's asking, what are the links between high estrogen or other hormonal imbalances, high insulin, inability to metabolize dietary and stored fats, thyroid issues, and inflammation? That would take a whole textbook, honestly. What I can say is that our immune system, the nervous system, and the endocrine, or the hormone system, are all connected. Anything that affects one is going to affect the other. So stress, foods we eat, toxins, whether we're talking about mold toxins, plastics, fragrances, you guys, are hormone disruptors. And this does tie into, and I like how you're tying it into this bigger picture of things like what's happening with the pancreas and insulin, what's happening with the thyroid, what's going on with our fat metabolism. There are lots of things that can affect multiple pathways. And that's the link, is what are the underlying triggers for these various things. So you're thinking along the right rows there. Right, again, looking for questions that are really, we've got a lot of great questions here, and I wish we could do all of them, but I'm going to stay on topic here for us. We'll talk about supplementation soon. And bring these questions about trouble with progesterone or trouble with some of the supplementations when we do that. And if you might think about the order of operations we talked about. Louise is asking, does isoquercetin need to be stopped when taking the Dutch test? It depends, Louise. So the quercetin in particular, I'm going to show you here, will affect this section, which is a tiny indicator of how you're methylating. I don't think that this is a good solid indicator because methylation is quite complex and it's better to do a full methylation panel. But quercetin can affect this right here. I personally don't use this a whole lot, again, because my population is very complex and because many people use quercetin to help manage their symptoms, and coming off of it can be hard for them. So you have to make the call about whether that marker is going to be helpful and meaningful for you and whether coming off of quercetin is going to cause you flaring. I personally don't like people to come off of their flaring, things that are going to cause them flaring to come off of, but that's a personal choice. Poppy's asking, what if estrogen is too low and not high? Again, got to look at those 3 different forms of estrogen dominance and see, but some people do have all of their hormones low, and including their progesterones, and that can mean that there's something problematic further upstream. And remember, again, we looked at this. I'm going to see if I can back out to it. We looked at this map of how these are connected. So if everything's low, that's where it's helpful to have these different ones at the same time, so you can back up and see, well, does it seem like there's an issue at pregnenolone? Where is this coming from? And that may take some detective work. All right, looking at, again, a few more questions. Great questions, you guys. And I'm sorry I can't get to the ones that aren't on topic here or are really personal questions. For the person asking about the really high melatonin, I would definitely reach out to the lab. That's not usual. And I would get that screened by an endocrinologist. And let's see, Melody's asking, I have a Dutch from summer 2020. Would you recommend testing again before starting bioidentical estrogen? Mold symptoms have grown stronger, been told I'm estrogen dominant. That's a hard one, Melanie. You know, I would go with what you feel most comfortable with and your practitioner, what's happening there. I always like more data if we have the budget for it and to have really accurate data, getting a little borderline there on it. So you'll have to check in and see what makes the most sense for you. Felicia's asking, where's our practice? So I have a consulting practice. I don't do any diagnosing. I don't prescribe. I do consulting on complex cases, and we're online. We're all remote. So you can find out more if you go over to our website at mastself360.com and you click on the contact section, and there's in the FAQ, there's some more information for anybody who's looking for that. And then Julia's asking, is there a specific time during the cycle to do the Dutch test? For women, it's generally days 19 to 21 if you have a regular cycle. So 19 to 21 would be the days that you would generally do it. And it's all in the instructions there. And then if you don't have a regular cycle, they have some information on their website, and you can Google Dutch test, and you should be able to find the website for the company that runs this. And it's called Precision Analytics is the company. And they'll give you some information if you have an irregular cycle. All right, everyone. I know I didn't get to all the questions. There were lots of fantastic questions. We're going to be back soon on how to support options and ways of supporting your hormone levels. Particularly, we're going to focus on estrogen and progesterone. And if you want to join us next week, so we do these for our new people. We do these most Mondays at 2 o'clock Eastern. And we have different topics each week. next week, I'm checking our calendar here. I think I'm remembering correctly. Yes, next week we have a really special guest. I'm super excited about Cynthia Allen. And Cynthia is somebody who specializes in structural concerns for people who deal with things like EDS, mast cell activation. Cynthia, I have to owe a huge amount of credit because when I was in a car accident 5 years ago, I could hardly move. My muscles weren't firing properly. I couldn't carry a purse. I couldn't lie down for more than 45 minutes at a time. It was horrible, you guys. And Cynthia really got me. I couldn't even do physical therapy. Nothing would fire correctly. Cynthia got me moving again. She got things firing correctly. And we're going to have a really great dialogue about how to move when you're dealing with these kinds of health issues, and regular exercise, going to the gym, is not the right fit for you. She has all kinds of tips. She's a genius in this area. I can't wait to introduce you guys to her and bring your questions on movement and what to do when you have these kinds of structural issues. I think you'll love Cynthia Allen. So have a great rest of your day. It's good to be with you guys, and we'll see you next week.